today's speaker. Let me change over the slides so we have the right slides on when we're doing the webinar. So let me introduce Sarah Mercer. If you do not know Sarah Mercer, she is a professor of foreign language teaching at the University of Graz in Austria, where she's head of VLT methodology. Her research interests include all aspects of psychology surrounding I'll try and speak, surrounding the foreign language learning experience, and she's written and edited prize winning books in this area. If you've not read them, go and read them because they are excellent. She's currently the vice president of the International Association for the Psychology of Language Learning and serves as a consultant on lots of international projects. In 2018, she was awarded the Robert C. Gardner Award for Excellence in Second Language Research by the International Association of Language and Social Psychology. A lot of associations in this, Sarah. And she is also the lead author on the Global Skills Position paper, and probably one of the reasons she's here today. So let me hand it over to someone who I always enjoy listening to. Sarah, you haven't got a camera on. Could you put your camera on for me? Perfect. All right, I'll hand over to Sarah. Enjoy the webinar, and I'll see you at the end.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's nice to see you again, and thank you for having me. It's nice to see everybody. It's great to see so many people here. You're all at different times of the day. For me, it's at the end of the day, end of a long day today, because we had the first webinar early this morning. But it's nice to be able to hang out with you guys and talk a little bit about an interesting and exciting new topic, at least exciting and new for me. Just to give you a little bit of background so you know where I'm coming from with this. As you may be aware, OUP put together an expert panel paper, they're called, on global skills, and I had the privilege of working with some colleagues. So I can't take great credit for all of the things in here. Much of the things in here are things that were developed together with my colleagues on the expert panel paper. And I also have to do a little shout out and a hi to Johanna Gruber, who's one of my assistants in Graz, who helped me make my slides pretty. Okay, let's get started. So I got to ask you a question, a very fundamental kind of philosophy type question. Please use the chat box. I'm going to try and make today's session as interactive as I possibly can, knowing that this is a webinar and they're not easy to do that. So please get active in the chat box with me. What is for you the purpose of school? Why do we send kids to school? What do we want kids to achieve by attending school? What is the purpose of having school and education? Okay, to educate students for life in the century they're living in, to get an education of ethics and moral value, to become citizens of tomorrow, to be with others, to learn to empower students, to prepare them for life, to give them an education, let kids grow up, find their own way, help them to socialize, help them to gain life skills. Oh, can't read that quick. Shape them as human beings, help them prepare for the future, foster their creativity. Fabulous, lots of great things in there. I don't think any of us as educators actually need to really question the issue that for us, schooling and education is more than just passing exams. It's more than just ticking the boxes and doing the bare basics of what education is about. I think many of us became teachers, became educators because we wanted to make a difference to the lives of the kids that we teach. And that's where we start to reflect more critically on what schools are actually doing and what the purpose of schooling is more generally. There was a survey done by Martin Seligman and his colleagues, and he asked basically two fundamental questions. It was a large survey, and he said to people, in 2 words or less, what do you want for your children in life? So let's get you to kind of face this now. What kind of things do you want for your children in life if you're asking your kids or other people's kids that you know? Okay, critical thinking, happiness, to be able to be adaptable, happiness, health, fulfillment, success, stability, love, happiness, lots of happiness, security, be a good citizen, to be happy, to have a good life, autonomy, health, security, fulfillment, excellent. Now, the second question that they asked these parents was, in 2 words or less, what is it that you think schools teach? Okay, which is a slightly different question. So in 2 words or less, what is it you think schools are actually teaching? If you want to contribute now and see what if they're different, it's knowledge to conform, academic content, knowledge, subjects, theory, culture, theory, notions, content, passing exams, success, knowledge, abilities and life skills, knowledge, getting a job, life skills, knowledge, academic knowledge, autonomy, theory, information. Okay, let me show you what the responses were. So this probably will not surprise you, and it fits with a lot of the things that you said. That the things they wanted for their kids is they wanted them to be happy. They wanted them to be confident, content. They wanted them to experience kindness, learn about kindness, learn about good health. They wanted satisfaction. And then I asked them what schools, in short, they wanted their kids to experience well-being. And that when we're preparing kids for life, we're not just preparing them to go into the workplace. We're fundamentally preparing them for life more broadly. And if you ask parents what they want for their kids, they're not as, of course, parents want their kids to do well at school, but really, the main thing you want is you want them to find love, to be happy, you want them to find fulfillment in life. And when they asked parents what they thought schools taught, they had things like achievement, thinking skills, success, conformity, which came up a couple of times here as well, literacy, mathematics, discipline. And they said, in short, that schools were teaching the tools of accomplishment. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with teaching those skills, and they're important skills to teach too. But if there is such an imbalance in what we're doing in school, if we're not preparing them for life more broadly, if we're not preparing them for these other parts of life that most of us and people who are parents feel that are so important, something is a little bit off, something is a little bit wrong about what we're doing in education. So this is, for me, quite a fundamental issue in what we're doing in our jobs and our roles as educators. So this is a great quote from a guy called Guy Claxton, who's written a book called What is the Point of School? So he sort of devotes a whole book to reflecting on this topic. And I'll just let you read the quote by Guy. So you see, he's making a distinction between making people successful exam passers, so that they know how to pass exams well, but overlooking this deeper need for them to be successful people. And by this we mean people in life more broadly, people in life more generally, people beyond the schoolroom, beyond the narrow confines of an academic subject or an academic exam, thinking about what they need to function in life more generally. This is one of my favorite educators. For those of you who don't know him, this is Sir Ken Robinson, who's one of my favorite people. One, he's got great humor, but also great insight into education. If you don't know him, go and Google him on YouTube afterwards. He's way more interesting to listen to than me, and he's fabulous. And he says here, our task is to educate their, meaning our students, whole being, so that they can face the future. We may not see the future, but they will, and our job is to help them make something out of it. So in other words, we have no idea what the world will look 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. We can't even imagine what things will be like. So we need to be preparing our students with the skills to be able to cope with those kind of changes, that kind of world that we cannot yet envisage. And it's about looking at our learners as whole beings, not just making them prepared to be good workers in the workplace, but helping provide them with the skills to help them to function and flourish in life more generally. And that was one of the key things that sort of informed our approach to this global skills paper, that we wanted to look at global skills in a kind of fresh way, that we wanted to make sure that we took this approach that said, you know what, school is about helping learners to succeed in life more broadly defined. It's not just preparing them for jobs, it's for much more than that. So our turn to global skills came out of this kind of background, our kind of conviction as a group that we wanted to make a difference, we wanted to help people to reflect on how they could do that. Many of you will be familiar that this sort of notion of narrowly defined traditional academic subjects, so school subjects, that stems from the sort of 1800s. That notion of very narrowly defined traditional school subjects is really starting to feel very out of date. So there's a lot more interdisciplinary work, there's a lot more doing projects, there's a lot of project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, approaches where we're starting to say we need to broaden up our understanding of traditional academic subjects. If we look at the kind of ways that the planet is changing, the Earth is changing, the global skills we need have to deal with changes in technology, the very fast pace at which things develop and change, much greater diversity and mobility. So there's a lot more people moving around, people talking in different contexts, using different languages, working across different cultural settings. The globalized economy, so much more diversity in that respect. And there are societal problems. So we've got a lot of awareness now about issues to do with the environment and eco-literacy, but also things like there are higher rates of depression amongst young people, but also amongst educators. Mental health issues are becoming a topic. So we need to be helping our learners to prepare them for life in this environment, in this world. And this is where we took away the notion that we wanted to help people learn for life. So adapting the notion of lifelong learning, but broaden it up and say, what we mean by global skills is not just preparing them for the workplace, it's helping them to learn for life more broadly defined and more generally understood. We also had a look at various curricula across the globe, and there are various places where global skills. I just put some example. Well, I haven't. Johanna put some example flags here to illustrate the kind of countries that already have global skills deeply into their curricula, already have them being examined and looked at in research terms. And if you can look here at the flags I've just selected as examples, this is happening across the globe in different continents. So global skills is not new. It's already starting to happen to large extent. But there's some gaps in terms of how much preparation we've had, and I include myself in this, that I feel I need a lot more support in knowing how I can do this effectively, how I can bring these skills in. And that's hopefully what this series of webinars is going to help with. So let's have a little look at the context that you're in. So knowing that there are these different countries and different curricula that already have different types of global skills, or you might be more familiar with them as 21st century skills, something I'll address in a moment. What kind of skills are in your curricula? What things are already there that teachers maybe across the curricula are expected to teach? Okay, social skills, good. What else? Citizenship, critical thinking, communicative skills, strategic behaviors, inclusion, digital literacy, sustainable living, communication, social skills, personal skills, citizenship, communication, collaboration, resilience, inclusion, technology, critical thinking, cultural cooperation, communal, critical thinking skills, fabulous. So you see, there's a lot already happening. So this is not entirely new, and this is things that you can build on. There's a lot already in curricula where there's a certain expectation that we build these things into our teaching and integrate these into what we do. So this is what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. These are the sort of areas that we cover in the Global Skills paper. You will get a slide at the end of the presentation that allows you to, what do they call, QR code and a link so that you can download the Global Skills paper and find out a little bit more. My hope today is to just give you a flavour and an idea about some of the issues we address, and then you can delve into it a little bit more deeply by looking at the Global Skills paper. There's another webinar that will be done on the 26th of November, I think, and that's going to be on very concrete teaching ideas of how you can implement this in practice. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the background, and then we'll move on. So let's talk about what we understand by global skills. We've taken a move away from the notion of 21st century skills. And for obvious reasons, that term is already quite outdated. It's no longer the term that's most frequently used. It feels outdated to talk about this, and it isn't necessarily relevant in the same way. The traditional way of understanding 21st century skills were what are known as the 4 C's. So there was critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. And if you look at a lot of the things that you guys commented on that are already in your curricula where you work, these skills have already started to be introduced. So this started really in the sort of early 90s, that these kinds of skills were being integrated very much into school curricula, into teaching, into course books, and those kinds of things. But they were very much focused on looking at the workplace and looking at the kind of skills you needed to be successful in a work context. And there's been growing criticism of that, to say that schools are not just factories to prepare people for school, for jobs. It's not just preparing people for the workplace. But schools are about helping the whole person to develop, to flourish, to become the person they need and want to be. And so that's much more than life in the workplace. It's about life beyond, life more generally. So we took this move away from thinking about 21st century skills. We broadened our understanding of it. We really tried to make it much more about life broadly. And that's where we started to work with the term global skills. To get some ideas about the things that we wanted to put into the document, some of the skills we wanted to draw on, we decided to look at lots of different types of frameworks that already exist and pull out the competencies that were common to them that we thought were important. If you look at just two examples that I put here, so we looked at the UNESCO's 4 pillars of education that some of you will be familiar with. That started in around the mid-1990s. And if you look at this, one of the key things I want to draw your attention to is it wasn't just about knowledge and it wasn't just about skills. And if you look at the last 2 things, it was about learning to live, learning to be. So this is a big shift in thinking, that we're not just preparing students for jobs and knowledge and those kind of skills, but we're preparing them for skills for living in communities, living in a local community, living in a national community, living in a global community. If you look at this model here, the OECD model, the PISA Global Competence Framework, also started to look at the different kinds of values and attitudes that we want to foster in learners and that we want to develop. It's very interesting to note, and many of you will be familiar with this, that the OECD PISA studies, which have been so influential and putting this emphasis on testing and on exam scores, now test and measure learner well-being. And doing that has created, of course, a huge shift in perspective. It's not just about how learners do on exams. It's about how well they're doing in school. How are they flourishing? How's their well-being? How are they feeling about being a student at school? Two of the other frameworks that we looked at was the AETC 21st Century Skills. This was also, if you look at this again, ways of thinking, tools and ways of working. So those are the things you would typically expect. But they also introduce ways of living in the world. So they're also talking about the fact that, education has a responsibility beyond just preparing for the workplace. The 21st Century Framework, this framework here is a lovely framework that I've also found very useful in my own teaching. And one of the things they do is they talk about key themes that they want to address in 21st century skills. And they talked about global awareness, financial literacy, civic literacy, environmental literacy, and health literacy. And so you can see these are big themes to address. And across subjects. So one of the things that perhaps I should stress at this point is developing these skills in the classroom, developing these skills in our subjects is also transferable across subjects. So that's one of the things where there's great opportunities for interdisciplinarity, but also developing these skills, it's possible to work in different areas. So after looking at all these documents, these are the skills that we grew out for global skills. So these are the things that we wanted to stress that were not just about the workplace, but were about life more general. And we developed a cluster of 5 clusters of skills. I'm just going to go through these and explain them a little bit to you and what our thinking was behind it. So we had 5 skill sets. So we looked at, for our understanding of global skills, we've included communication and collaboration. We've got creativity and critical thinking, intercultural competence and citizenship, emotional self-regulation and well-being, and digital literacy. Now, we've grouped them into kind of clusters that sort of make sense to belong together, things that sort of function together. But these are quite broad. There's a lot that can be included in there. We've put digital literacy explicitly because we wanted to stress that, but really we expect digital literacy, to be in all of those skills. So they kind of go across all the clusters. Let's talk a little bit about what we mean by those. Okay, let's see what you're thinking about this is. So the first one we took was communication and collaboration, which is sort of very reminiscent of the traditional 21st century skills and also has got sort of very strong ties, of course, to language teaching. Tell me about what you understand by communication and collaboration. What kind of skills would you understand, or how would you envisage that? Or how would you define that? What would your understanding of that be? Teamwork, good, Leah, that would make sense to me as well. Pair work, being able to work with others. Group activities, being able to engage in discussion skills, group work, peer tutorage, teamwork. Giving and receiving critique, that's a nice one, that's interesting. Negotiations, tolerance, working with others, working together, interpersonal skills, good. Peer sharing, tolerance, being ready to work with others, listening and understanding, good. Speaking to each other, accepting other people's opinions, cooperative work, super, excellent. Okay, this is how we put it together. So we talked about a few things. So the first thing is that communicative language teaching fundamentally is defined as being able to communicate effectively and appropriately. So this one is not a massive stretch for most of us. Most of us do this in our regular teaching anyway. And communicating effectively and appropriately means it's not just about knowing vocabulary, knowing lexis, knowing grammar. It's knowing how to use that appropriately. So in certain pragmatic ways, in certain genres, in certain settings, in different types of relationship. So for us as language teachers, teaching these skills is fundamental to what we do anyway. This is a key part of communicative language teaching. We also added that it includes empathy and perspective taking. So it's very much about what some people said here, understanding other people's opinions, seeing the world from other people's point of view. So empathy is not about agreeing with somebody else. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but empathy is about being able to understand why somebody might think or feel something, even if we strongly disagree with it. And you can imagine that empathy and perspective taking is key for good communication, good collaboration with others. And particularly for English language teaching, Many of us now no longer teach intercultural competence with reference to a specific context, because obviously many of our learners use English in all kinds of settings and all kinds of combinations. So we often talk about non-culture specific intercultural competence. So not talking about one specific culture, but just saying, how do we interact interculturally? And that will come a little bit later. And empathy and perspective taking is a key component of that. And we know that in language classrooms, a lot of what we do, a lot of the activities, so a lot of people mentioned group activities, pair work, those kind of things. A lot of our work and our activities in classroom depend on interaction. They depend on collaboration. We need learners to work together, interact with each other. And I think pretty much every good teacher knows that you can't put people in a group and assume it's going to work. Sometimes they need a little bit of help in working about their roles together and how they function and work together as a group. But essentially, we put these two together because they're mutually reinforcing. If you develop good communication skills in learners and you help them to communicate effectively, appropriately, and sensitively with others, that's going to help them to be able to collaborate better with others. So the two kind of reinforce each other. One of the things that was talked about a lot this morning in the chat box this morning was, if you're going to teach communication, one of the key skills we teach is listening. Being able to listen. Somebody's got it here. I've just noticed. Miriam, I'm sorry, I didn't see you'd written that as well. Listening is one of the key components. You know, there's a great expression that we say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, because you should listen twice as much as you speak, which I think is nice and doesn't always work particularly well with us. Okay, so let's have a look at the second one. What do you understand around the idea of creativity and critical thinking? What kind of things does this make you think of? What kind of things does this inspire you to think of? Project work, so solving problems. Okay, debate, thinking outside the box, dealing with situations, looking at different points of view. Project works, looking at how to promote different ideas, communicate ideas. Interactive, so developing the imagination, problem solving, brainstorming, debating, analytical, logical thinking, agreeing and disagreeing, being able to look at different contexts, generating new ideas, going beyond the basics, building our own thinking. Excellent. Okay, super. So some of the things we put here is critical creativity is not just about being able to do beautiful art or beautiful poetry or song. It is also that. And one of the great things that we can do is we can encourage learners to express their ideas in lots of different media and different formats. But creativity is also about being able to think outside the box, being able to think about things a little differently, look at things from a different angle, see different perspectives, think about things from a different point of view. And particularly because of issues, for example, with fake news now, and there's fake social media posts, there's fake photographs, there's fake videos. Particularly in light of all that kind of thing, there's a really strong need to help our learners to be critical, to think for themselves, to not accept at face value everything they see and hear, but to think about it and form their own opinions about things. So generating this ability to think. One great way to do this is asking lots of questions, posing questions, getting learners to be the ones that ask the questions. Being able to objectively and critically evaluate information, and being able to cope with multiple perspectives. So not always having to have everybody agree with you, but looking at different perspectives, being able to say, I see what you think, I understand. And a lot of people have that reflected in the notion of debating. So creativity and critical thinking is about being able to look at things from different perspectives, think about things in different ways, and also be able to generate new ideas and think outside the box. And of course, be able to express that in a variety of ways, so not just always a traditional way. So the next one, this probably one is the one we're most familiar with as language teachers. This is the one that we all know is a fundamental part of what we do generally. What kind of things do you understand by this? What kind of things have you got in the notion of intercultural competence and citizenship? What kind of things do you include? Oscar, respect, accepting and understanding other cultures, accepting others and being accepted, respect, being aware of intercultural difference, volunteering, that's interesting, politeness, tolerance, empathy, respect, going so quick, being aware of other cultures, respecting each other, accepting, understanding others, being tolerant, having an awareness of oneself and other, responsibility for oneself and others, understanding government and society, promoting one's own values while respecting other people's values, socializing properly. Excellent. I knew you'd be good at this one because this is the one that we all know as well. We put a few things in here. So one of the things that we talk about is that intercultural competence really does involve an openness and curiosity about other people's cultures as well as your own. So one of the problems for learners can sometimes be that they're not aware that they're viewing the world through their own cultural lens. And so one of the things that we can do is we can help learners to create a little bit of distance and become aware that they have their own view of things, that this is one lens and that there are other ways of living and experiencing the world, and try to open a tolerance to diversity, to different cultures, a criticality to it, fostering a sense of tolerance and understanding. And that's fundamental to language learning, I think. As language educators, we're all about communicating across different settings, facilitating global interaction. Part of that is a foundation for me of respect for diversity, tolerance of others, understanding different perspectives. So also being able to interact appropriately and sensitively, even if you don't know somebody else's culture, but being able to respect and understand that there are going to be differences maybe in expectations, norms of interaction and so on, and how to deal with that. Awareness and respect for cultural diversity. And then we get to the notion of citizenship, which is very closely connected to intercultural competence, and a sense of inclusion, respect for others in society, respect for others in our social groups, but also that understanding in citizenship is that we are all citizens of various social settings, and that can be our classroom, it can be our school, it can be our nation, but also global citizenship, that we are citizens of a planet. We share this planet together, and that we all have a mutual sense of responsibility for that. And we can all find possibilities for action, that we are responsible citizens, that we take our citizenship, our position in these societies seriously. And quite honestly, the kids are doing a better job than we are in respect to the environment now anyway. So they are leading the way and giving us an understanding of what it means to take action and find responsibility for global issues. And of course, a key part of citizenship then is about sustainable living practices. So finding ways to help learners reflect on their role as citizens in respect to the environment, and the fact that we as a whole share this planet and we all have a responsibility for that. Yeah, Greta Thunberg, she's a fantastic source of inspiration for this kind of work, and she's a great example for students in many ways about the kind of responsibility and feeling a sense of possibility for action. It doesn't have to be so large as she is, but small steps for action. For those of you who are particularly interested in looking at some of the comments, for some of the things of being part of eco-literacy, there's also a Facebook group called ELT Footprint that I would really strongly recommend. They have great materials, great resources and ideas for that as well. Okay, next one, emotional self-regulation and well-being. This is the one that perhaps feels a little bit less familiar, although again it's incorporated in the UNESCO, it's in various well-being frameworks, it's in various global skills frameworks. What kind of things do you understand by this? What kind of things would you expect to see under this kind of heading? Okay, accepting oneself, so self-care, Patricia, yeah, social awareness, emotional intelligence, respect also for others, self-control, emotional control, understanding feelings, understanding how to regulate emotions, knowing yourself and understanding emotion, happiness, coping with stress, self-reflection, coping with difficulties, knowing yourself and your limits, respecting others, finding confidence, self-control, healthy living, mindfulness, coping with disagreements, well-being, part of good language learning, stability, self-awareness, resilience. Excellent. Super. You guys are fantastic. One of the things that we put in here is emotional self-regulation is closely tied to social emotional competence. And learners do need help to understand their emotions, particularly as they're growing up, where this is a difficult time. To be fair, adults need help understanding emotions. So we've put in here recognizing and understanding emotions. So being able to recognize what your triggers are. What triggers certain emotions in you? How do you recognize these emotions? What do they look like for you? And how do you regulate that? How do you manage those emotions so that the emotions don't control you, but you have some control? It is not, I should add, stamping out negative emotions. Negative emotions are part of life, and they're usually a very important clue for us about what's going on, how we're responding to something. But emotional regulation is understanding, recognizing those emotions, recognizing the triggers, and working out how to live with them, how to manage them, how to work with them. It's not trying to suppress them. Physical and mental health literacy. We know that physical and mental health are very tightly connected. They both affect each other. So helping learners to become sensitized to self-care, looking after themselves physically and mentally. thinking about exercise and what they eat, and that various aspects in terms of what contributes to them feeling confident, feeling comfortable in a group, how they manage their stress, how they regulate their time, and so on. Awareness of self-regulatory strategies, becoming aware, somebody wrote earlier about reflection, how to reflect on one's own emotions, one's own position, one's own experiences, one's own stresses, and understanding that well-being is a long-term thing. It's not just about short-term hedonism. So well-being is about having a long-term perspective about how you see yourself living a meaningful, purposeful life, having social relationships, contributing to society in those kinds of ways. That's a great way of putting it, Manuela. Finding your way, finding your identity and adapting, finding your place in the world. That's a big part of well-being. Okay, let's move on. The last one is the one that you guys are hearing a webinar, so that speaks volumes for you. What kind of things would you put under here under digital literacy? What kind of things would you include? What kind of things would you have in here? Okay, good, Sarah. Online safety, using the net responsibly, using electronic devices, being able to work with technologies, understanding different meanings, understanding the role of IT, being able to use touch screens, protecting personal data, good, being awareness of dangers and responsibilities, good, platforms, coping with fake news, very much so, gadgets, social networks, selecting the right kinds of things to engage with, technology for well-being, definitely, Natalia, skills in using technology, dangers, as well as the benefits of technology, safety, excellent. Some of the things that we then put in, so we've talked about literacy across a range of digital media. So not just necessarily talking about being able to use the internet, but also how to use smartphones, how to use different types of apps, different kinds of literacy in terms of being able to produce that kind of output, being able to contribute to that kind of community using those kind of tools, but also be able to engage with it critically, be able to look for fake news, be able to look for sites that are dangerous, helping them to become aware of the borders between online world and real world. So sometimes, particularly for younger learners, this can be difficult for them to feel and to sense that kind of boundary. So that's one kind of thing that we also consider in the kind of literacy of working with digital media. So using digital technologies to communicate appropriately and safely with others. Data literacy, being critical about the data that you engage with, but also being responsible and ethical about the data that you have, the data that is shared with you. And this for us was kind of underpinning all the other skills. And some of you even wrote that in your comments here. So the closely linked to the well-being, intercultural competence, global citizenship, lots of the other skill clusters depend and use digital literacy. So we had it very explicitly, but for us it was kind of a foundation that a lot of the other things were built upon. Okay, so why did we think that global skills should be taught particularly in English language teaching? Well, we think there are very good reasons, because we believe, or we think from our own experience as well, that you're probably doing a lot of these kind of things already. So we felt that this was not a massive shift in thinking for language teachers. Very often we teach language as a way of communicating, achieving different communicative goals. And communicative language teaching involves very often teaching for intercultural competence, teaching for social emotional awareness, teaching for a sense of interaction, cooperation, communication, and so on. So for language teachers, we have a little bit of an advantage on other teachers in a sense that a lot of these clusters of skills are fundamentally part of what we do already. So it's not a big shift to start expanding our thinking about this and saying, wait a minute, these are the skills I'm kind of comfortable teaching. These are skills I don't really pay a lot of attention to. How can I maybe introduce those? So we already have good experience, and we already have a lot of ideas of how we can develop that. An example of this is, of course, also CLIL. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're doing CLIL here, but CLIL is a model where, for those of you who are not familiar, CLIL refers to content and language integrated learning. And this refers to where you teach a content subject and you teach a language. And ideally, you want to try to integrate both learning objectives at the same time. So the experiences with CLIL give us a model for how we could teach global skills in English language teaching. And I put this little person here who's holding some DNA. Just as an example of DNA, because what it looks like is a really good example. The Positive Education Network used this. is if you look at the two blue strands, one of those represents your language teaching goals in a lesson, when you want to achieve something in terms of language. And the other blue strand are your global skills goals that you want to achieve in a lesson. And what we do is we find ways to interconnect and bring the two together. And sometimes we're going to be doing maybe a little bit more of the language and sometimes a little bit more of the global skills. But what we feel is possible is that you can integrate the two in a sustainable way. Sometimes more, sometimes less, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. It's a little bit controversial, but I've put it here anyway. We may also conceive of English as a global skill. I realise that's relatively controversial in terms of different languages that we foster and want to teach, but it is also a way of communicating globally. And so some people may also see English itself as a global skill. So let me move on. What skills would you say that you already teach? So my guess, and I might be wrong, but I don't think I am, my guess is that you already teach quite a lot of these skills. There are things that are already part of what you do, whether it's digital literacy, collaboration, communication, intercultural competence. Just share what kind of things you already teach. Okay, communication, cultural awareness. Oh, Anna, that's great, most of them. Creativity. Digital literacy, communication, collaboration, thinking, collaboration, interculturality, media skills, communication, environmental literacy, digital literacy, cultural diversity. Oh, Angelica, great. You've got most of them in there. Communication, digital literacy, global awareness, critical thinking skills. Excellent. So you guys are already kind of pros. You know a lot about this. But you can see that for us as language teachers, this is what we do. So it isn't a massive shift for us to start saying we think a little bit more explicitly about these skills. We look at these clusters, we look at what they involve, and we try to find ways to bring them into our teaching regularly. So that when we're planning a lesson, we really plan with these kind of two strands, think of the DNA, two strands intertwined, and we look and say, what can I do here to boost some of the global skills? Sometimes it's just asking a reflective question, and other times it's maybe doing a whole activity that really foregrounds that and brings it to the front. So there are different ways that we can do that. So let's have a little look at some of the ideas. As I said earlier, just for those of you who came a little bit later, just to reiterate, I'm kind of just giving you a little overview and introducing you to the notion of the paper and global skills. My colleague Nikki is going to do a webinar on the 26th of November, and she will just focus on teaching ideas and activities that you can do to teach global skills. So here are some ideas. One of the things it has to be is that if any teacher feels that global skills is an add-on, one more thing we have to do, we'll never do it. Because we're all busy, we've all got a lot of things we have to do. So it has to be sustainable. You've got to try and approach this in a way that feels manageable for you. Now, if you're already, like you guys are already doing quite a lot of things, it will be easier for you to expand and build on that and do even more. For some people who this is completely new to, you may need to start very small. And it's okay to just start with small steps, that maybe you look at your lesson and when you go teaching tomorrow, you think, is there any way I can put in a question here or get the learners to reflect on something? Think a little bit critically. Maybe ask them what we call a divergent question, so some very open question where you ask their opinion on something. Or you take a photograph and prompt them to talk about it. So it can be very small steps, but it can also be big projects. It can be looking at global skills in isolation in the clusters, or you can have many of them together. But the idea is to try to lesson plan with these dual aims in mind. Planning the whole lesson with the goals in mind, but also looking at activities and say, is there any way that I can tweak this to build in a little bit more of the global skills as I'm going along, so that it doesn't feel like a burden, but something that I can sustainably do as part of being a teacher, a global skills teacher. So, for example, here I've just put some examples here, really small ideas, just adding reflective questions. You might be doing a role play, for example, and then you get the students to ask questions about why somebody might behave the way, what might have caused them to have this opinion, where this might have come from, so developing their empathy. You might ask them to look at photographs or texts and ask them about why a person might be feeling a certain way, where these emotions might come from. And we all know, I suppose, that literature, poetry, films are fantastic ways of fostering empathy and getting learners to think about different perspectives and different viewpoints. You can use short activities. For example, I've just picked two photographs here from Pixabay. Just get some photographs to prompt discussion. What does it make you think about? What attitudes do you have? You can get learners to take the photographs. So on their journey to school, something that elicits a strong emotion in them. What did they see on the way to school? Show the photographs, talk about the photographs and so on. There can be longer activities, so we can maybe get the students to create a blog, developing their digital literacy about happiness, so looking at well-being, how happiness is experienced across the globe in different kinds of settings. And we can have them create a personal happiness portfolio. This can be digital or real, where they gather together things that make them happy, things that give them a positive boost. And these can be related to language learning, or of course they can be more general. You can do projects. So if you've got more time, and particularly any of you who are interested in things like Genius Hour, where you've got a little bit more time or scope in your curriculum, you might want to do a whole project. And if we're thinking now about sort of citizenship, work with the learners, get them to identify an issue in their local community and maybe do a project with them to look at this concern. So an example that we've given is maybe teaching digital literacy to seniors in an elderly care home, or going to a care home and teaching English, doing some English games, teaching them English. We know that teaching English slows down cognitive decline. So particularly in a senior's home, this can be a really useful activity for them to slow down cognitive decline. It can be very motivating, can be fun. And we all know that there is no better way of learning than teaching. So getting our learners to be teachers for a change. There are various things that are needed for teachers to be able to teach global skills. And I think prerequisite for that is positive teacher attitudes about this. We have to identify this and see this as part of our role. And the fact that you are here suggests that you already have this kind of notion. So I've put some of these statements here that we've included in the document about if these are kind of the starting point. If we don't feel that looking after learners for flourishing in life more generally is part of our responsibility, we're not going to feel the need to integrate these skills. So before we find out how to do this, I think we have to start with how we feel about it. And if we believe the purpose of education is to prepare students for life more broadly, if we are open to the idea of trying to integrate this, small parts, in any which way, that's the key to getting us ready to go out there and say, you know what, I'm going to try. I'm going to do the best I can to integrate this in my teaching because I want to make a difference to the planet, but I want to make a difference to my learners and how they succeed in life afterwards. We also need to feel confident. And I have to admit, this is things for me to try and learn. So this is also new for me, thinking about ways of doing this. And we're becoming more creative. Which is great, and I enjoy it. And I have to tell you, it's really motivating to be able to teach these skills alongside language teaching. And that we keep developing as a global skills educator. You don't kind of just have it. It's part of a way of being in the classroom. And that hopefully you guys and me will feel that we identify as a global skills educator, that we are teaching language, but we're also teaching global skills. We're making a difference to our learners now, in the present, but also in the future. Something I should also add, all of these global skills contribute to learners being successful now, in school, in the present, and their academic achievement now. It's not just about later, it's not just about in the future, it's about now. So how do we assess? Now this is a really controversial topic, and so I'm going to touch on this a little bit now. Why do we choose? So we have a section in the document, and this was done by one of our specialists who specializes in assessment procedures. And this was done by Gordon, who talked very much about why we would assess global skills. And we felt very strongly about this, that when something is assessed, it strengthens the value. People take it seriously. Now, I wish that wasn't the case. I wish people would just take it seriously because they can see the value of it for themselves. But the reality is that in many settings, anything that we assess in some way makes it serious and makes it somehow salient and important for stakeholders. Now, I have to say that we do not believe that this is something you can assess with a grade. This is not something you're going to put an A, B, C, D on, or a 1, 2, 3. It is not something that you can put a value on in that way. So the assessment we are talking about is this kind of formative assessment, this ongoing feedback and dialogue with learners that helps them to develop these skills. And learners can self-assess, and we can assess what kind of progress learners are making in their development of these skills. So it is not assessment in the traditional giving a grade a number. It's about saying we want to give this value. We want to help people see that they are making progress and developing. And if we are going to convince parents and heads of school that we need to be integrating these skills, they are going to want to see some kind of evidence of progress and that the time is well used. So this is just a kind of a practical part of this, that formative assessment of global skills is a way of developing them, a way of fostering them, a way of helping them grow, but it also gives credibility and salience to teaching global skills generally. We've worded it like this, that we talk about assessment as a way of gathering information to make a judgment about where people are and where they need to go. And we see this as part of observation and dialogue. So this is something that as a teacher, you do anyway. So when you go into the classroom, you observe your learners in group work, you look at what they're doing when they're doing something, you listen to their conversations, you engage in dialogue, you ask them about things. That for us are part of assessment practices. The feedback we give is like good advice. We give constructive feedback, constructive advice. And we have in the document, in the expert panel paper, we've got profiles for the learners. So I printed one of them out just so I can give you an example. So it says, for example, learners who have got communication and collaboration skills can communicate effectively, appropriately, and sensitively with others in a range of contexts, for example. There's a whole list of different profiles. You'll see it when you get the document later if you haven't already got it. And what we have said is, okay, those act as a kind of competence framework for these different skills. And we have chosen to rate them on 3 axes. So we can say, okay, the learner is working towards that competence. Not got it yet, but they're working towards it. We can say the learner's achieved that competence. They can do that now. And then we can also say this learner has exceeded that. They've gone beyond the basics. They're actually doing really well in that competence. So that's how we are understanding assessment for global skills. And we think it's really important to work explicitly with learners on developing criteria. So if you have an activity you want them to do, this doesn't have to be a secret. You can be explicit about it and say, guys, we're going to do this. We're going to work on this together. This is what I want you to do. These are the skills I want you to develop. How do you think it would look? What do you think would be the criteria? How important do you think they are? Let's draw up a kind of checklist for ourselves on what would be a good example of this. And again, we can focus on individual skills or whole clusters of skills. And one of the really useful ways is when you've been doing this for a while, you can collect together examples and models of successful work. So learners have an example in mind, they have a framework, and it can give them a starting point to be able to kind of self-assess or peer assess. And the kind of evidence that we can draw on is assessment through learner output. So anything they produce, I just put here a report or a presentation, any kind of output that learners create is evidence for us of learners using and employing these different skills. Self-assessment and peer assessment are hugely important parts of assessment for global skills. Remember that peer assessment, it's not just about the person receiving the peer assessment. So it's not about the person who says, oh yeah, I've got this assessment for my peer. The peer giving the assessment, that's the person who learns the most, because they have to understand the criteria, they have to understand what counts as that, and they have that little bit of distance to be able to assess more objectively when they're looking at somebody else's work, often than their own. And probably the most effective way of finding evidence of global skills is getting learners to put a portfolio together. And a portfolio is not putting everything in one lump. This is where you say to learners, okay, I want to see, let's say, for example, we've been talking about empathy. Let's say we say to the learners, guys, I want to see you showing me evidence that your empathy has improved and that you have got empathetic skills. You include things in the portfolio that you think are a good example of you displaying empathetic behaviors. And that's a great way that they can make those decisions. They can develop their own critical thinking skills. And the portfolio is a lovely example of you being able to see the kind of progress, and their parents see the kind of progress that they're making in that respect. And then the final thing I want to talk about is it's not just your responsibility to be doing this. We need to create a climate in schools, in education systems where global skills are given a priority. That schools are not just about testing, they're not just about exams, they're not just about narrow views of subjects, it's about preparing learners for their future lives. And there are a few problems with this. Teachers, and I include myself in this, may feel unprepared to teach them, that we don't have enough materials, we don't have enough resources, we're not sure of ideas and examples of how this can be introduced. And great credit to OUP, this is what today is about. This is what the webinar is about. That's what the expert panel paper is about. That's what Nikki's webinar is about. We're making a start. We're trying to help ourselves, myself included, and other teachers to feel confident and feel ready to teach them. One of the other problems is that some stakeholders may not be convinced that you need global skills. So some parents are concerned, and some principals, heads of school may be concerned that it's somehow distracting from the real business of school, which is taking exams and passing traditional subjects. And so there may be some work that has to be done to convince them of the value, to show them that, one, it helps learners now, it helps them in their academic endeavors, but also that this is a key part that's contributing to their future lives, and it's not distracting from their academic subjects. It's not distracting from their regular English classes. Ideally, we want to have the kind of support at the school and national level where we've got training, where we've got CPD opportunities to develop these skills. We need to see a shift in attitudes. This has already started. I gave the example, in fact, earlier about PISA including well-being as one of the global competencies and measuring it and assessing it in different countries. So those kind of changes are taking place internationally and nationally. We may find that we have a little bit of work to do institutionally. So working on the levels and the schools that we're at, that we have to work a little bit at changing attitudes if need be. And the last point is, I am utterly convinced that teachers can be the change makers. You guys are here, you can make the difference. You can be the ones who change attitudes, who make a difference, we start at the ground, we start grassroots, and we make the difference of what happens in the classrooms, and people start to take note. Why not share your ideas on the OUP community via their blog or via their Facebook page? Why not create a group in your school to share ideas? I think that we have the potential to make that kind of difference, and that the change comes from us. What we talked about in terms of the environment that is conducive to global skills is when you have this kind of commitment on a global level. So we've got, for example, participatory pedagogy, where learners are involved in decision making, where they become aware of democratic principles, citizenship behaviors by being part of a school community. The curriculum, the communication with parents, working with other teachers, working globally, the fact that you guys are all here, and also the kind of training and support you need. All of those things together make it easier for us to engage with the right kind of attitudes, the knowledge and the skills to be able to teach global skills and English in an integrated way. For me, to conclude, the question is not whether we should be teaching 21st century skills, it's rather how we should be doing it. I don't think there is any doubt that the notion of what schooling is about and the importance of education has changed. We need to be thinking about our responsibilities of teachers in ways that allow us to broaden our notion, broaden our remit, but we have to do this in ways that are sustainable, that feel manageable for us, that don't compromise our language teaching, but actually enhance it, that are motivating for us to do as educators, but also motivating for learners. And I really think that English language teaching is the perfect place to do this, and that global skills can be a really empowering and engaging form of education for learners and teachers. Nikki on the 26th is going to give you a lot more concrete ideas than I was able to do. I hope I was able to kind of whet your appetite, get you interested, start you thinking about this. My key messages for you to take away: global skills are empowering and are accessible for every learner. It's one way of looking at social justice. Giving these skills to learners in all different kinds of contexts can be empowering for them. It does prepare learners for life in and beyond the workplace, and I think that's the important shift in focus, that we're looking at not just what prepares learners for work, but life more broadly. ELT Place is the perfect place to do this. We can assess global skills, not in the traditional way, but we can assess them in terms of giving formative assessment, feedback, helping learners to see their progress and develop. Global skills are transferable across different subjects. We can start small. They can be little things that we introduce to our teaching, but we can have huge, far-reaching influence when we do bigger things. And for me, the time is now to become a language global skills educator. Please join me and my colleagues in this movement, and let's make a difference. Thank you. That's my clock, by the way.
So the clock telling you it's time to stop.
I was dead on time, you see.
You were. There is one question which probably does need a bit of clarification. Can you see it in there? The question from Saber about stakeholders, which you were just talking about.
Yes.
So,
Thank you, Saber, for the question. So Saber's posted a question, which is what I mean by stakeholders. So stakeholders are basically people who have some kind of investment or some kind of connection in the education process. So obviously the traditional stakeholders tend to be teachers and learners. They're the obvious ones in the classroom, but also the administration in school, the head teachers in school, policy makers, people who make decisions in the ministries and so on. And of course, parents. Parents are key stakeholders who have a big influence on what is acceptable in school, what is wished for, what kind of things that people want and so on. I hope that helps answer the question. Are there any other questions before I leave you for the evening to go knit socks and do the other lovely things you're going to do?
I think you've probably dealt with everything that's come up. The main
Super.
question was suggested reading, but that would be the global paper that I've just put on screen. Yeah,
Brilliant. Thank you.
brilliant. Okay, well,
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for a great.
and thank you very much, Sarah. It's always a pleasure listening to you. So there is those of you who want the reading or have had their appetite whetted, as Sarah said. Then you can download the paper, the Global Skills paper, from there. You can, if you look at the link in the middle of the screen, it's actually a live link. So if you put your mouse over it, and this will be for computer users only, you can click on it, and it should open a window for you to be able to download it. Alternatively, you can take your mobile device and scan that QR code. If you're on a mobile device, you will find it tricky to get now, but you will be able to see that link later on and get it then. Or, of course, just simply put into your browser the URL, and that will take you to it as well. Okay, I'll leave that on screen for a couple more minutes. So just to remind you, and I'll remind myself to stop the recording.